Hello and welcome to Newsmakers for this Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. I'm Louie Butko. And while the kids may be back at school, our provincial representatives enjoy an extended summer break with more than 5 weeks still until they return to Queen's Park. And will it be a full-on sprint full of promises and big spending by the governing Conservatives to set up a spring election? Well, to answer that question and so much more, I'm very pleased to be joined by the founder and author of the legislature's favorite newsletter, the Queen's Park Observer, Sabrina Nanji. Sabrina, first of all, how was your summer? It's been quiet, not really.
No such luck. The Conservatives and pretty much everybody actually at Queen's Park have been keeping us busy throughout this summer. It feels like we're already in unofficial campaign mode.
Yeah, and you've kind of been following this story super closely. You get the scoops. One of your scoops in August was that Ford wants to know whether you're in or out by the end of the year. How convinced are you that within the first 6 months of 2025, we'll be heading to the polls here in Ontario?
At this point, it seems likely, but of course, nothing is set in stone. When the Premier was asked about it, again, just this week, he said that for sure we're not going to the polls in 2024, but he did not rule out an election in spring of 2025, or I should say early 2025. He said that he's still deciding on that. But you're right, throughout the summer, there have been these little hints and clues, including that the Premier has asked his caucus to let him know, are you in for the next round or not? And if not, step aside so that we can get another candidate in there to go door knocking. And that's something that usually happens, 6-8 months out from an election. So it is fueling speculation. I should say, like dousing gasoline on speculation that there could be an early election. Nothing official yet, but we did see Rick Byers, the MPP for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, announce this week that he won't be running again, and he may not be the only one.
Yeah, we heard Monique Taylor as well this week make a similar decision, deciding to go for the federal NDP. So we'll get to that in just a second. Sticking with this election, I want to pull up a liaison survey from just a few weeks ago. And this shows that Doug Ford's Conservatives have a 13-point lead on Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals. There's the NDP at 21%, the Green and Other at 6% each. I mean, Ford's government this summer have gained support. I mean, if he's thinking of an election, those have to be pretty encouraging numbers for Doug Ford and the rest of his Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the odds are in Doug Ford's favor right now. A lot of public opinion polls suggest that if there was an election held today, the Conservatives would win another majority government. And I think that's also kind of a challenge for Doug Ford is, how do you sell the public on the reasoning behind an election before our scheduled date of 2026? Because he's got this whopping majority at Queen's Park. He's effectively got carte blanche. It's like, why do you need another mandate at this time? But I think, what was significant in some of those polling numbers that you just pulled up is also what's happening with the opposition. They have had a hard time getting their message out there, getting their message to stick. I think part of that is because Doug Ford is sort of this like bull in the china shop type politician. He tends to eat up a lot of oxygen in the room. He has been making a lot of announcements this summer. And I think it has been difficult for Marit Stiles from the NDP and newish Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie to really make a name for themselves, I think, especially when you're going up against someone like Doug Ford. So really, I think politically, it would be advantageous for Doug Ford to go to the polls right now. I mean, I think a lot of people might be paying closer attention. And so those numbers might change a bit, when the election is actually called, whenever that happens to be. But right now, I think Doug Ford is feeling pretty good from the political standpoint, but he kind of needs to work on the comms side of it, the public relations. How are you going to sell this to people on, why we need an early election?
Let's talk about the comms, because we're looking at this now. This is just a random, not even a random poll. This is mostly Doug Ford's Twitter. If you look at the last last 2 or 3 weeks. All he seems to care about is the fact that he's gotten booze in convenience stores. He'll push this message again in a few weeks when most of the grocery stores that have applied for this licensing also get their beer into shelves and mixed drinks and all that stuff and wine. What do you make of the Premier's push on alcohol? How is it being received? Is this something that's positively affecting voters or would-be voters? Like, what do you make of Ford's obsession? We know what the Liberals are going to say. It's a $1 billion boondoggle. But what have you made of the rollout of the alcohol policies that Doug Ford's had?
Yeah, I think the obsession with booze is interesting because our premier, famously claims that he doesn't drink. But this is, nonetheless, red meat for his base. This is a campaign promise circa 2018, a long time coming, delayed, something that we are paying, hundreds of millions of dollars more to speed up. And this sort of is the event that spurred a lot of the early election speculation. Why are you speeding up liberalized alcohol sales, a long time, campaign pledge now, if we're not going to the polls earlier. But I do think that, while this might be popular with Doug Ford's base, and I think a lot of Ontarians too, it's sort of common sense if you just look to Quebec or even south of the border and it's just sort of getting up to speed with those jurisdictions. But then you sort of compare it to, the healthcare system, and anyone who's had any interaction with a hospital or a walk-in clinic or their doctor's office can know the strain that system is under. And so I think that, while this might be a win for Doug Ford, I don't know if it's going to sway any voters that might be on the fence right now, because it's not enough, I don't think. Life is a lot different than it was in 2018 when Doug Ford first made this campaign promise to liberalize alcohol sales. And so I think that while this might be a win, I think that the question is at what cost, and, could that money be better spent on healthcare or education, which is certainly the line from the opposition parties right now.
A lot of people asking that question, and a lot of people asking how much money they're actually saving when they go into a convenience store and see the markup on a can or a case. It's not as cheap as you're paying it in the LCBO, and I know that LCBO outlets they're required to maintain that same price. So yes, he's saying convenience and saving money, but not sure how much money people are actually saving on that. And then you mentioned the hundreds of millions of dollars that went to Brewers retail as well. Let's talk about Marit Stiles for a second, because, actually, let's start with Bonnie Crombie, because, she's been the leader for just under a year. It'll be November, will be a full year. I remember having her on this show, asking her how she's going to make her name known across Ontario without having a seat. I'm going to give her sort of like a C- for her appearances this summer. It doesn't feel like we've seen enough of Bonnie Crombie, especially with an impending election possible. What have you made of her first 11 months as the leader of the Ontario Liberals?
Yeah, you're not the only one asking, where is Bonnie Crombie? And while she has, spent her summer canvassing and touring the province, it does seem like that has kind of fizzled out a bit. She has been doing things like fundraising events, but at the same time, the Liberals really can't even compare to what the Conservatives are doing. And so I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that Doug Ford is just this like bombastic politician that tends to grab a lot of attention. But at the same time, the Conservatives are also spending millions of dollars on attack ads on Bonnie Crombie. And, it's politics 101 to define yourself before your opponents do. And Bonnie Crombie is relatively new to the provincial political scene, as you mentioned, and beyond Mississauga, where she was, a popular mayor for some time. I think that, she needs to introduce herself to the rest of Ontario, especially when you've got Doug Ford and the PCs painting her as this like out of touch, Trudeau loving elitist that is just like going to tax and spend and run this province into the ground. And so, the Conservatives have been doing a lot of fundraising, a lot more than Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals at this point. They're in the third place right now, so that's not really surprising, but it still doesn't change the fact that you need cash to run a competitive campaign, especially when it comes to advertising. So I think we're going to start to see more of that maybe towards the fall, maybe early next year, when we're hearing that there could be an early election. But you're right. Bonnie Crombie, I think, has stumbled a little bit out of the gate, and really, Doug Ford is not playing around right now. They've brought the hammer down against her hard, and there has actually been numbers to suggest that their attack ads are working. It was actually another liaison poll that gauged the leader's popularity, and it showed that more than 50% of people who know about Bonnie Crombie don't like what they know about her. And so the big question is, it seems to be that Doug Ford and the Conservatives' attack ads are working. So she's really got to get out there and start glad handing, kissing babies, having spaghetti dinners, doing the barbecue circuit a lot more, I think. And it's not an easy feat when you're also having to fundraise and come up with a policy platform and do all that stuff that you have to do as a rookie leader.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell a political party how to spend their money, but if I did have one piece of advice on their attack ads, just update it. I'm sick of looking at the same one from the NHL playoffs to football season. It's the same Bonnie Crombie ad. Just give it a fresh coat of paint, please. That's my only piece of criticism when it comes to attack ads in general. Just keep them fresh, I guess, is what I hope for. To that point, though, we have a by-election. It feels like last time we had you on, it was leading up to the Milton by-election. Now we have a Bay of Quinte by-election. Liaison out with a poll today that has the Liberal candidate up 1%, but a pretty evenly a three-way race going into that one. We know what the polls said going into Milton. We know what happened in Milton. Why should we not think a similar situation might play out? A close polling race might not be that once the votes are counted next week.
Yeah, I think Bay of Quinte is like a whole other ballgame right now. It's been a conservative stronghold since the beginning. The MPP who left, Todd Smith, former energy minister, education minister, he had been the representative there for well over a decade. And so this is really the Conservatives riding to lose. But you mentioned that liaison poll, which suggested that the Liberals were ahead by 1 point, which is within the margin of error. So it's essentially a tie. And that is, I think, surprising, even for me. I know the Liberals that I've been talking to on the ground have been talking a big game. They're feeling very confident because they have this candidate, Sean Kelly, who's very locally popular. He's a counselor. He's also this morning radio show host. And so, and it's, interestingly enough, Todd Smith was also a radio broadcaster at the time he was elected. So they seem to be popular and to win elections there. But, the Conservatives are not going to take this lying down, right? Like, they've had their ministers out there door knocking, the premier himself. They've also got Tyler Alsop running, who's also a local councillor. And so it does seem like, if nothing else, it might be a close race. And even if the Liberals were to come in second place, even a close second would still be a victory for them, because in 2022, in the last election, it was the NDP that came in second. And so we've sort of seen this trend in recent by-elections where the Liberals, if they're not able to win it, they're at least coming in second and overtaking the NDP. And so I think that's while it might not be the best news for the Conservatives if the Liberals, come in close second, it's also very bad news, I think, for the New Democrats, because it suggests that the Liberals are now potentially moving into official opposition territory and taking that away from them.
Let's talk about those New Democrats. Like Bonnie Crombie, it feels like I haven't seen enough of Marit Stiles this summer. Like you said, Doug Ford has this ability, this talent, if you want to call it, to get in front of the camera, to get his caucus in line, on message. How many times do we see the exact same copy and pasted message go out across all MPPs, right? But he has his party in line. Marit Stiles, we've had the Sarah Jama conversation, and now it's another Hamilton MPP. You and I were talking before we got on air. It used to be that the NDP didn't have to worry about Hamilton. How big of a concern is Monique Taylor jumping to the federal level, trying to run there? Do you think, how big of a concern is that for Marit Stiles?
Yeah, I think Mart Stiles is definitely at least a little bit concerned, because you're right that Hamilton typically is a stronghold for the NDP, but that's no longer the case. I mean, Sarah Jama is now sitting as an independent. Monique Taylor, longtime incumbent and well liked in the riding, is now kind of throwing that up in the air and deciding to seek the federal nomination. Over in Ottawa, Joel Hardin is also seeking the federal nomination, and incumbents tend to have, just generally speaking for any party, incumbents have a leg up on the ballot. There's name recognition. If you're, liked enough, you'll get another chance. And so we saw in 2022, the NDP in particular lose a couple of seats up north and in the Windsor area, I think in part because they did lose incumbents. And so they kind of lost that edge. And so I think they are probably worried that history might repeat. But at the same time, there had been these rumors about Monique Taylor for months now going around that she might run federally. So I think that Marit has probably already started, at least unofficially, the conversations, or at least the hunt for a strong replacement candidate, because she's really got to hang on to that seat and, protect territory, not only from the Conservatives, but also the Liberals, if she wants to, hang on to official opposition status or form government in the next election.
All right, Sabrina, I got either the best timing for me, maybe not so great timing for you, to have you on the show today, because Premier Ford is speaking in Vaughan. Instant analysis here from you. I'm going to put you on the spot because Doug Ford announcing $26 million to construct a new trades training center for LiUNA. And he says that'll be able to double the number of people who can be trained at the facility from 50 up to 100,000 people. Are we going to see announcements like this? Big funding money. Is this the norm for the next little bit? Do you see? Is this how you feel like the premier is going to play the next 5-6 months?
I think that's a pretty good bet. Anything that's popular with voters, infrastructure, funding for, skills and jobs training, like we heard today from with the announcement with LiUNA, bridges, roads, any little milestone of progress. We've kind of already seen that happening this summer. You bet Doug Ford is going to be there, or one of his ministers will be, with, a big pair of scissors or whatever it happens to be, because they'll want to be reminding people that, they are investing, they are trying to build things, and those are things that tend to be popular with the public. So expect to hear a lot about highways, bridges, roads, infrastructure, all that good stuff. And it'll really be up to the opposition to kind of remind people that Doug Ford has been in power for 6 years, and if they're not happy with the state of housing, the state of healthcare, you name it, then they're really going to have to hold the premier to account. So yeah, buckle up, because I think things are about to get a lot more intense in the coming months.
Buckle up. That's great advice. What other advice do you have for us casual listeners of this program who may not be paying attention as closely? Maybe they're more entertained by the debate that was happening south of the border last night, which, of course, is going to be consequential for us here, but less consequential than who you send to Queen's Park. So what's your advice for us to be better informed? What questions should we be asking in the next few months if we are ramping up to an election?
Yeah, I mean, I think, reach out to your politicians. Like, they are going to be out this summer and throughout the fall, and they want to be talking to people because they obviously want your vote. And I think, make them work for it, really question them on what they're going to do on their policies, what's important to you. Because, yeah, I think that for a lot of us, it kind of seems like a far away thing. But as like my parents like to say, you can't really complain about the state of things when you don't vote. So that's, I think, yeah, getting involved and paying attention and really discerning what the policy promises are beyond just sort of the spin and the talking points and the good news announcements. I think, the onus is kind of on everybody to do their homework so that they're sending good people to Queen's Park.
And with that, we saw a bit of a war of words this week with the federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, and Doug Ford. You wrote about it in one of your newsletters in the past week here. This kind of plays into whose hand, like who is hoping who blinks first. I mean, it is going to be sort of a race to see which one of these pulls the election trigger first, no?
Yeah, and I think that, Doug Ford really pulled no punches, saying that Jagmeet Singh is a greedy politician who's just holding out for a pension and is just doing this gimmick. While there is a lot of uncertainty at the federal level, I mean, at least if you ask Doug Ford, he doesn't think that there's going to be an early federal election. We don't know, but no matter what, it would be politically advantageous for Doug Ford to have an election before the feds. And so I think that it does feel like who's going to pull the trigger first. But at this point, my money is still on Queen's Park going earlier.
Yeah, well, if I was going to be asking anyone for betting advice on the subject, you'd be the first person I'd call, Sabrina. You were the first person I called to get us set this fall of course, it's not for another 5-6 weeks for them to return to Queen's Park, but always appreciate your insights. Thanks for making the time for us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. My thanks to Sabrina Nanji for joining me today. You can subscribe, and I highly encourage you do so, to the Queen's Park Observer so you know what's going on at the Pink Palace, that, of course, being Queen's Park itself. Thanks, Sabrina Nanji, for making the time today. Thank you for listening. And while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline and the Trending Now podcast, which you catch every Friday as well. My thanks to Laura Brody for directing today's episode. And one more time, thank you for checking us out. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.